Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Klausen's Sagas, with, of course, our historian, Mikkel Klausen. So, what is on the discussion for today? We had talked about something about, like, Queen Brunhild, but I know the story, I've read the story, but what are we talking about?
What we're talking about is Queen Brunhild of Iceland. She's a figure in the Germanic epic written about 1200 by an unknown Austrian from the Danube region. It's called the Nibelungenlied. It's a romantic poem.
Gotcha. So this is about romanticized martial society. See, it's a little more intellectual than I'm used to.
So the story, at least for this section of it, regarding Queen Brunhild, is King Gunther, a Bulgarian prince, or Bulgarian king, not prince. He wants to marry Queen Brunhild. He's heard about her beauty, her, stature, her knowledge, so on and so forth. And he gets one of his vassals, Siegfried, to come with him to Iceland and, earn Queen Brunhild's hand in marriage. And what's romanticized about this is that it's unrealistic. The Siegfried is a hero figure.
Yeah, we all heard of Siegfried.
Yeah, like in the sagas, you have hero figures that, inhumanly strong or smart, or there's some magic involved with whatever they're doing. This is more or less the same. Different contexts, different stories, but the same idea is it's not totally real. He goes there, they pull some trickery throughout the entire episode of competition with Queen Brunhild, and eventually Queen Brunhild has to relinquish all of her lands in Iceland to King Gunther.
By marriage.
By marriage.
So it's like a double loss.
Yeah, she did not win anything from that deal.
Okay, so let's go into a bit further. What do you mean by that? Why'd she lose so much?
She lost so much because she is now a queen. And in a patriarchal, king-based society, the king is the one that inherits and passes on and owns. So as soon as he marries Queen Brunhild, she's more or less now subjugated to him. And that's why she had these games in place. So whenever there was a suitor that came by to marry her, she would, in these games, defeat them and ultimately kill them. And therefore she kept her lands and kept everything, where in reality, you wouldn't have people going to a queen, asking their hand in marriage, just on the off chance they'll survive. It's very romanticized. It's very heroic of Siegfried and Gunther to go there, defeat the odds, and subjugate Queen Brunhild.
And get their stuff.
And get all of the stuff.
So, but where does Siegfried fit into all this?
So when King Gunther is in these games, Siegfried is behind the scenes, kind of fixing things. At one point he's hiding in a cloak, or it's him under the armor. He's the one actually completing these games that King Gunther's too old to actually do.
Oh, so King Gunther essentially cheats.
Oh, he cheats. 100% cheated.
So he cheated to win all these games.
Yep.
So he's not really a hero then.
Not in this case, no.
So it should have been probably Siegfried competing and marrying Queen Brunhild.
He was interested in another woman, Kriemhild, which is, it's a whole other thing. In this episode, it's mainly these three that are the focus.
Okay, so just talking about this story here, we go into romanticized martial society. What does that really mean? What are we talking about?
If you understand the concept of honor in the high and late Middle Ages, it's very ideological. It's very, in a way, unrealistically ideological. It would be loyalty to your superiors, essentially get the woman of your dreams, have land, have success, be a good fighter. The ideology is be the hero. And in romanticized martial society, the hero is kind of the center point of it.
Okay, so give me other examples of this.
We have other Germanic epics, like Eric in Eric. He's another hero. We have poetry like the Song of Roland that kind of builds up the idea of be loyal, be strong, treat other people well, especially those that need help, like the disabled, is actually one kind of one factor they take into account. People that can't take care of themselves, or those of just lower social stance in general.
So this is where you get this idea of like the goodly knight, i.e. the paladin, for a better term.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is where you start getting this idea of these chivalric knights that people have romanticized. They still romanticize to this day.
Exactly. That's exactly where it came from. It's from these poems idealizing these knights.
But most knights, history tells us, were probably not like that.
No, not all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
There was, it was a cultural point to take these ideas and emulate it, make it part of your life, but it just wasn't practiced that way.
Like what was people basically? We like to look back and go, knights were like this Song of Roland guy, right? But what were they more like?
They're more like your average run-of-the-mill lord. They're doing what benefits them and their family and their own kind of sphere of influence. And there were those, obviously, that would, take up kind of knightliness and make that their life, but it wasn't consistent. It's not like every single person was this knightly figure. There were those that were self-interested and just did not care for these.
Okay, so in essence, you'd say it's more the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, more of an exception.
So the idea of the robber baron running rampant around Europe probably more common than the paladin going and saving a village from robber barons.
Oh yeah, we have examples of knights just throwing the idea of honor knightlyhood out the window and just attacking who they can, what they can for what they can get.
So really these knights were just basically land pirates, i.e. Vikings.
Yeah, they were later European land Vikings.
So when you see okay, so we see these people like today, like they really romantic, like especially we see them in the Western martial arts communities, right? Like we see them in this historical fencing communities. They're wearing like their tabards and their very, very fancy gear, and like acting really paladin-like. Mm-hmm. That'd be like what we talk about when we say romanticizing.
Yes. Anything like a medieval fair or Renaissance fair of today, romanticized.
Really? Because really it's probably the truth is probably a lot darker.
It's a lot darker, and admittedly, I'd rather go to a romanticized Renaissance fair than a realistic one.
So, I mean, if we were to recreate a true historical Renaissance fair, what would that look like?
There'd probably be a duel in the street.
Oh, that sounds fun to me.
Not for me.
For me, it sounds great.
I'm not that good yet.
Oh, you'll get there.
Someday.
So, okay, see duels in the street. What else?
There would be the homeless. There would be sickness and disease, especially in cities where, cleaning out the streets isn't as easy as maybe in the countryside where there's just not as much foot traffic or horses or business going on. It would definitely be dirtier. It wouldn't be like you may see in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the streets are just mud and people are rolling around in it and there's carts of bodies. Not like that, but it's certainly not, the clean downtown streets you may find.
And how would knights and other nobility like that act, do you think?
They would act, it would be kind of a mix between, aristocracy, I'm better than you, but I'm going to protect you, and tax collector.
That's if you were lucky.
If you were lucky. You had knights were they were also tax collectors. They had to collect the taxes of their lord if you refused to pay them.
Okay, so if you're sitting in the middle of the street with your buddies, like the knight's not going to walk around you, is he?
No, not going to walk around you. They're not going to just, cut your head off as they walk by.
But you might get shoved out of the way.
You'll get shoved out of the way, and if you really refuse to move out of the way, then it's a problem.
So in other words, it's like that scene from Willow. Get out of the way, Peck!
Yep, you have to just get out of the knight's way. If you're not their equal or superior, just don't bother them.
How would the food be like?
Depends who you are. Sometimes if you're really poor, you can make this bread called trencher, which is, the poor man's bread, and it could sometimes be filled with grass or dirt as a filler. Or it could just be bread, but that depends on how much money you have and what resources you have.
So grass, dirt bread sounds fantastic.
On the other end, you could have peacock.
Oh.
And you could have trencher that is just bread, no filler, and use that as a plate. Don't even eat it, just use it as a plate.
Oh, so you can give it away to the homeless Roland style.
Exactly. You could have bread that is for eating on the table, and then you have your trencher plate bread.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we have this idealism, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we see in the martial, in like basically like you call the romanticized martial society, but the reality of the martial society is anything but romantic.
Pretty much. It's level of it is romantic if you're lucky. You may be in the higher echelons of society and you get to protect those that are below you. But if you're fairly poor and you even relatively stand in the way of a knight, you might get kicked.
You might get kicked. So the reality is definitely a little more Game of Thrones than it is Lord of the Rings.
Somewhere in between, I would say.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between.
Nothing is polished and pristine, but there isn't feces in the gutter either.
So in the movie The Last Duel, which you said you've seen, right? So we look at the characters in it. We have like the two knights and the king. Like, was that more accurate?
We're getting closer and closer. It's movies will still sensationalize medieval history for the sake of making a good movie, and that doesn't bother me too much because I know that's how you make a good movie. And if you don't romanticize it, sensationalize it, might get a little boring.
So the knight. So basically, the idea like you have one knight's not as good of a fighter, might suck up to the king more, party with the king, and the king can do pretty much whatever he wants, right? And that might screw over a more talented knight like we see in The Last Duel. That was a normal kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty normal.
Okay, what other movie have you watched you like think would be a better version of the king?
I think the movie The King with Timothée Chalamet, that one I did like. Because
Explain why.
It did show more of a humanistic side of the Middle Ages where, brothers compete for glory and for the throne. One may not want the throne for XYZ reasons because naturally you're in constant danger. There's war. You have to deal with all that. You can't really live your life. You're living a king's life. And especially the combat itself, I found more realistic to what combat was. It may not have been a big mosh pit with no lines and no colors because you can't see who you're fighting in that case. If you remember in the last fight scene, you have just a mass of knights. There's no color differentiation. Can't tell who you're fighting. That part's not so much realistic, but the grittiness of it and taking hits that don't just send you to the moon is more realistic, and the motivations for doing their actions is more realistic, I find.
Okay, that's something. So in other words, that's kind of de-romanticizing.
Yes, they're getting closer and closer to something that's more historical, more accurate, and in my opinion, more interesting that way.
Gotcha. So what do you think would be the main factors for this romanticization of martial society obviously powers the fantasy world?
A large theme in a lot of kind of like even in their education system for that romanticized martial society is keeping the social order rigid to where it is if you're a knight, you're a knight. If you're a king, you're a king. If you're a blacksmith, you're a blacksmith. You're not going to move up the social ladder and thus encroach on those that are already there.
So in essence, it's almost like reinforcing a caste system.
It really is.
And so unlike in like earlier periods, the blacksmith is not also going to be a warrior taking stuff. He's just going to be a blacksmith, and he's going to be like, "Yes, my lord, here's your stuff."
Until they need a meat shield in the militia.
But he's a blacksmith, so he's probably pretty valuable. Unlikely he's ever going to be doing that.
Unlikely,
but it could happen. But unlike you look at like a historical figure who was a blacksmith and a warrior, like the real Scalagrim, right? Who went out raiding and doing stuff.
He was also a landowner.
And a landowner. My point being is like those rules kind of like throughout society eventually became like the multitasking rule basically became like done away with.
Yes, the caste system became more and more rigid.
Gotcha. So that romanticization helped fuel that.
It really did. So now you have a farmer that sees a knight and they're like, I'll never be a knight because this is the social expectations. This is the romanticization of society. This is the caste system. And they're happy that way because that's their spot. That's where they should be. And they're exactly where also God expects them to be.
So basically God wills it.
God wills it. The king wills it. Society wills it.
So this idea that peasants became knights, not a thing.
Unless they did something incredible and truly heroic, no.
But I mean, peasant children taken to become like squires, pages to become knights.
I think that's more sensationalized. That's romantic.
Okay.
If you're, if you're a merchant, wealthy merchant, then your child may be taken, depending. But you had to be higher echelons of society to stand a chance.
So your dirt poor mud hut peasant is not going to have his kid taken by a knight to become a knight.
Nope, unless it's a truly exceptional circumstance that I have never heard of.
So that's a Hollywood.
That's a Hollywood thing.
That's a Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
So total BS.
Unless you happen to be the one and only child in the entire town and their squire just dropped dead.
Maybe you get lucky.
It's 1 in a billion.
Perfect. Well, thanks for talking to us about this interesting topic, romanticized martial society. It's a big mouthful for a guy like me who just hits people with stuff. But for this guy, not so much. It's an everyday kind of topic.
Well, keep your axes sharp and your mind sharper.